Hello, I'm Manuela Zaragoza. Welcome to Business Daily from the BBC. Coming up, the cost of palm oil, that liquid found in everything from shampoo and soap to lipstick, noodles and bread. It's been blamed for rapid deforestation in Southeast Asia. But now there's this too.
These products can, or there's a risk, that they embody human rights abuse and violations of national and international laws that are meant to protect the land rights and other rights of these communities.
So what's being done about it? We'll hear from the palm oil industry's own sustainability body.
We've recognised the fact that the complaints procedure needs to be improved.
And we hear what companies that use palm oil in their products say they're doing. That's all coming up in Business Daily from the BBC. As far as trees go, the oil palm is innocuous looking. In fact, in centuries past, the oil palm's exotic leaves made it an ideal ornamental plant. These days, it's the tree's fruit that everyone's interested in. The oil it produces is found in about half of all packaged products sold in supermarkets, from food to consumer goods. That's because palm oil is highly versatile and edible. Also, it's cheap and grows easily. You just need land. But at what cost? That's William Allure from Colombia. He was in London a few weeks ago, telling journalists about the bodies he's come across on the land that used to be his old farm. The last body he recovered was his mother's. Today, he says, I see all these consumer products which they call sustainable. But what do they mean by sustainable? William was forced from his home in rural Colombia. Nowadays, he campaigns to retrieve family lands and community territories lost to Colombia's growing palm oil business. It's well known that palm oil producers have been accused of clearing forest in main producer countries like Indonesia and Malaysia to make way for plantations. But William travelled to London with the pressure group the Forest Peoples Programme to highlight the fact that the industry is now also being accused of human rights abuses.
The paramilitaries came. They pulled me out of my house. They made me leave my land, and then a company came and took it over. Now they're growing palm oil trees there.
So you've lost your home, essentially?
Well, no. Thankfully, with my wife, we have our home, but we had to leave our land, where we had the farm, the Santa Ana farm. Together with my brothers, we had to abandon our land.
Why is that allowed to happen in Colombia?
Well, violence in Colombia has always been about land, and during this violent period, 9 people from my family have died. In 1997, the paramilitaries arrived, and we had to leave our land. That same year, my father died, and in 2000, they killed my mother. Then in 2012, we went back to recover our land, and the paramilitaries had taken it over, and they said it was for a big palm oil investment, and now we can see that a big company has taken it over.
And there's no point going through the courts to try and get it back?
We tried to do that, but they just don't listen. The paramilitaries' leaders detained me, and the company's lawyer made me sign documents saying we could not take them to court. They said this was a huge investment, and that if we didn't comply, the same thing would happen to us as happened to our mother and father. Our complaints get nowhere. I'm a poor peasant, but I don't think this problem is restricted to Colombia. Exactly the same thing is happening in Liberia, in Peru, and in other countries.
William Allure. Also travelling to London with William and the Forest Peoples Programme was Agus Sutomo from Indonesia. He's director of a local NGO in West Kalimantan. It works with communities whose lands have been taken over without their consent. Agus helps them file complaints with the global body that oversees good practice in the palm oil sector, the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil, or RSPO. He says dozens of the people he represents against palm oil producers have been jailed.
We're not asking them to stop production. What we want is that the new companies that are coming into the area to clear land, we want them to stop and also to stop the human rights conflict. If all production stopped, there will be effects for those who have lost their land and now work for the palm oil companies. We don't think they would act responsibly to restore the environment they destroyed.
Agus Sutomo, campaigner from Indonesia. The delegates we heard from there travelled to London, Brussels and Washington to publicise their stories. Accompanying them was the Forest Peoples Programme Coordinator, Tom Griffiths. He says it's time consumers understood that palm oil's problems go beyond deforestation.
The key message from this delegation has been you have to also see that these products can, or there's a risk, that they embody human rights abuse and violations of national and international laws that are meant to protect the land rights and other rights of these communities. That is the key message.
A lot of consumers will think, well, there are agreements in place. There's the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO system. There's also the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification System. Surely these are enough.
Well, that's the other key message coming from the delegation, that actually these voluntary industry commodity standards that really are a form of self-regulation by the very same companies themselves are not enough, because they're still vulnerable easily to what we call greenwashing. It's a sort of checklist, paper trail approach to this without proper investigations and verifications on the ground where these companies have operations. That is one of the main concerns of these delegates.
In the meantime, though, would you say that the RSPO system of trying to trace where palm oil is basically not working?
Well, it has challenges. I think there have been very recently some positive actions by this body. It has suspended the certificate of IOI.
This is a big Malaysian palm oil producer.
That is correct. So it can take positive actions, and that's what's been the message again from the delegates to the RSPO, that those sorts of very clear-cut sanctions must be the general approach here. And there have been concerns in the past that RSPO, even if it sanctions a company, quite quickly lifts that sanction, yet the problem has not been resolved on the ground. So one thing is to sanction, the other one is to follow up. The same with the recent complaint in the Peruvian Amazon, which we're also a part of, against a company called Pucallpa Plantations. There's been a very positive response now from the complaints panel, but our question is, will they follow up with this? And when there's an evidence, the company now has to give evidence. How will they balance and weigh that evidence from the affected communities who've lost thousands of hectares of forest, had their lands grabbed, or the evidence of the company? We're not saying that these schemes are completely useless. We're saying they're not enough. There has to be more strict legal and binding regulation of these trade flows.
Tom Griffiths. You're listening to Business Daily from the BBC with me, Manuela Zaragoza. So what does the RSPO have to say? The global industry body for palm oil was set up in 2004. Its job is to certify palm oil that adheres to certain sustainability standards. Currently, just over 20% of all palm oil produced around the world holds this certification. So some 80% of the world's palm oil is coming from who knows where under who knows what conditions. The RSPO now has 2,800 members. Danielle Morley is its London-based European Director of Outreach and Engagement. How do you even trace palm oil?
It's not easy to trace oil, absolutely, because, the palm oil supply chain is notoriously complicated. But essentially, what we as a sustainability standard system does is it all goes back to the source. So a palm oil producer must first of all become an RSPO member, and then they should apply for their estate to become certified. And certification is done in accordance with a set of criteria that the RSPO members have together by consensus agreed this is the definition of sustainable palm oil.
But what do they mean by sustainable? The RSPO's own literature says it means not planting on conservation land and maintaining biodiversity. It also says that its principles include responsible consideration of employees and of individuals and communities affected by growers and mills. But who checks that?
We have a system of third-party auditing. So traceability happens first of all at the plantation and the mill, and a third-party auditor will come and assess whether or not that estate and that mill are in compliance with our criteria.
And how often does that auditing happen?
So a very comprehensive assessment takes place every 5 years, and then there's an annual surveillance audit.
And who are the auditors, and how do you know that they're doing a good job?
There's a small number of auditors. They themselves have to be accredited. We have another third party who's called Accreditation Services International, who we work with, who audit the auditors.
There must be people who try and bend the rules or don't comply fully, maybe between audits don't do what they're supposed to do?
You're right, there is, and the system is not perfect, but it does provide a level of assurance that previously was not there. One of the great steps forward taken by the RSPO system is in transparency and accountability. So the system that we've created together with the members means that when there is evidence of wrongdoing, then there's a means of recourse. It might get picked up by an auditor. If it happens in between the audits and we're alerted to it, we can investigate it as well.
And that's happened at the moment with one of your biggest members, which is the Malaysian company IOI. It's had its certification revoked for all its plantations. It's a bit of a test, isn't it? Because it's a big player. It's a bit of a test for your organisation to really stick to its guns on this one.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we are a system of a voluntary model of self-regulation, and there are rules, and those rules have to be adhered to, and there's checks and balances within the system. So in that case, there was a complaint that was presented to us by an NGO a number of years ago. We've worked with the parties over the years to try and resolve the complaint, and ultimately the complaints panel, who's a panel of members who sit on a case-by-case basis to review these sorts of issues, decided that they had to put in place a sanction of revoking the certification of that particular company.
But for many people watching, it will be quite disappointing that one of the biggest members of the RSPO can't even stick to the rules it itself helped establish.
It is disappointing. Yeah.
IOI is now challenging the RSPO's decision through a Swiss court. The Malaysian company says it has taken, in its words, corrective actions to review and enhance its sustainability practices. In the meantime, Unilever, also a founder of the RSPO and one of the world's largest end users of palm oil, has cancelled its contracts with IOI. It's clearly a critical moment in the RSPO's 12-year history. But what about those land grabs? The complaint some forest group people have is that when there is a grievance about their rights being violated or by palm oil plantations taking their land, that they make this grievance to the RSPO, but they find it quite difficult, A, to be heard, and B, for something to be done about it.
Yeah, it's not easy, and often these cases, they may be quite protracted, they may involve land rights disputes, there may be lack of documentary evidence, for example, to support the case of local communities. So there will be processes that have to be gone through in order to gather evidence, and it is that evidence gathering process that does take time and slows things down. The RSPO, we've recognised the fact that the complaints procedure needs to be improved, and we're currently reviewing the complaints procedure, and there's a public consultation ongoing at the moment to try and streamline the processes and make them even better.
Danielle Morley of the RSPO. Many of the big consumer goods and food companies readily admit that more needs to be done. Unilever declined to be interviewed for this programme. It referred us instead to its latest palm oil sourcing policy document. It says it's working to hit a target of achieving 100% physically certified palm oil and derivatives by 2019. And it says it's put in place its own policies, which include a stronger commitment to human rights. The cosmetics company L'Oreal also uses palm oil in its products. L'Oreal did agree to speak to us. Alexandra Platt is its Chief Sustainability Officer.
So we think that the model of RSPO should go further. The complexity is the traceability. So this is a process that involves a wide range of stakeholders. And it's a huge challenge to be sure that at every step it is responsibly handled. So what we have decided, we have done a field study, and we have decided that we want to trace back our derivatives to the mills. And so we have done surveys and exchanging with suppliers and local NGOs, and with our strategic direct suppliers, we have moved up the whole supply chain to the palm's origin, the mills and the plantations. And this is a huge challenge, but we are on the way to get through it. So we know already a lot more about our supply chain.
You say the RSPO needs to be improved. I mean, in this last month, one of the world's largest palm oil plantation owners, IOI, has actually been kicked out of the RSPO. Does that worry L'Oréal?
I'm not going to judge the working methods of RSPO because I understand the complexity of the process. Well, I think it's positive news that when there is a problem, the problem is carried to the attention of the companies. We have decided for us to do more work than that, to go proactively into researching and proactively verifying that in our supply chain, these kind of problems do not exist. This is a very complex and difficult process, and I think people just start to get the competencies and the right expertise to be able to follow up and do the job in the right way.
And when you say sustainably sourced, what does that actually mean? There is also the issue of land rights and land grabs, a lot of issues surrounding the land being taken away from local people to plant.
Exactly. And so that's the reason why we have now started a project to work with small and independent farmers.
L'Oréal's Alexandra Platt. Back at the Forest Peoples Programme's press conference in London, Indonesian delegate Agus Sutomo, who we heard from earlier, had this message for consumers.
Sudah lebih dari 20 tahun saya bergelut di hal seperti ini dan
I've been working on this for 20 years. I've passed so much information to local media, to national media. I've communicated with companies, reported to the RSPO to stop these human rights violations. But the government seems to be blind to land grabbing, to the environmental impact. Sometimes it seems it's just a small thing for the companies and the governments. So when I said I was invited to Europe to talk about this, I had a long debate with my organisation and the local people about whether I should go. They said I should, because 40% of the palm oil goes to Europe. And this consumption comes from damaged soil, from human rights abuses, from people going to jail, from contaminated water. It comes from damaged land. This is what is frustrating me. It seems that government, the RSPO and our own allies are not putting enough pressure on the people who are causing these problems.
Tapi tidak ada tekanan yang kuat dari pemerintah maupun dari RSPO, bahkan dari teman-teman sendiri.
Agus Sutomo brings us to the end of this edition of Business Daily. We're back again at the same time tomorrow. Join us again then.